Okay, right. Well, I'll be super quick. UK 5G Innovation Network basically is here to support the development of the UK's 5G ecosystem. So we're running events like this to help you understand how you might be able to apply in for funding or what other opportunities are available. We really want to promote the capabilities of the UK 5G internationally as well. But I think increasingly as the DCMS funded projects roll out and as 5G rolls out more generally, UK 5G really is there to understand and share best practices, good business models that are working, how to launch projects, how to engage with the different industry sectors or different communities or different citizen groups, such that we can really encourage 5G to be adopted by the UK and to be one of the best places in the world actually for 5G to be adopted both by industry and by consumers. So that's what we're here to do. So please feel free and use us. I'm not going to dwell on the partnership, but 3 organisations deliver 5G and we've got an industry advisory board. We now have more than 1,500 registered users on UK 5G with more than 800 organisations registered. We've got some working groups up and running, so I think a few of you may be involved in the working groups. With regard to finding partners for this particular competition, on the UK 5G website we've set up a section of the site called Collaboration Exchange, and in fact within there's a section of the site that helps you identify partners. So it's a place where you can go and say, look, I've got a project here, or I'm looking to join a consortium to apply in for this particular competition. Here's what I can offer and here's what I'm looking for. So please do use the site. If you're not registered with UK 5G, please register. It's free to use. And I know from other organisations that are registered, it's a place where they can get contact details, get profiles of individuals who they then approach in order to generate partnerships. So people, when they do register, find it's very useful. Okay, I'm going to plough on, I think. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ian Smith to talk about the 5G programme context. So please give Ian a round of applause and we'll join you up here. Thank you. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, John. I didn't realise it was such a long way round, actually. There's no steps at the front, so if you're coming up, be aware of that. So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Leeds, and welcome to our Rural Connected Communities briefing. Those of you who have heard me speak beforehand will know pretty much what I'm going to tell you, because I'm just going to repeat why the programme's here, the benefits and what we're trying to drive, and why things like the Rural Connected Communities is really important to the way we're driving the programme, and ultimately why we're doing this for the UK economy. The programme, we've had a vision, we've been here for about 2 years now. It was the autumn budget 2017 when the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that he was going to put 200 million into driving digital infrastructure and 5G to really try and do something different with it. And the idea behind it is about busting the myth on the 5G business case. Is there a business case for 5G? Depending where you sit in the industry, which sectors you're looking at, which bits you're really focusing on. Does the 5G business case work? Is there really a need for it? Is it just 4G and a bit more, a bit faster with lower latency and higher bandwidth? Or is there something really different we can do with this technology? Can we really start to use it in innovative ways, do things differently, and actually really build the business case by using these use cases to show that 5G can be a real game changer? And we want to do it in the UK. We don't want the rest of the world to go and do it for us. We want to be there right on the leading edge and actually use the UK and all the skills and all the great innovation we have here to be on the front foot and be the leader in the ecosystem. And generally, that all sums up to lead the way in 5G. So the world looks at us and says the UK's really got it right. They're doing some great stuff. They're changing the models. They're challenging the previous conditions and actually build a proper ecosystem around it. So that's why we thought we'd build an ecosystem. It's a classic of sellers and buyers. We've got enablers, we've got standards, regulators, and it's really interesting. We've got Ofcom here this afternoon as well, talking about spectrum in the way that DCMS has been working very closely with Ofcom to try and answer some of those questions that are being asked around freeing up spectrum so other people can use it. Don't just leave it with the operators. Is there another model that can be used here? So it's really interesting to hear what they've got to say about that. So what we're trying to do through the whole program is build this ecosystem with DCMS sitting in the middle of it, but trying to get people talking to each other, doing things in different ways, and that's why these competitions are great. And I'll talk about some of the earlier phases and some of the lessons we learned from that later on. We are seeing this ecosystem progress. If you think about where the UK was when 4G launched, I think our first operator launched at around 40, somewhere in the 40s to 50s globally on the world rankings. 3 operators were up in the late 70s. And in 5G launch with Vodafone and EE going first, we're in the top 10 of global countries to launch a 5G service, an incredible 5G service. And we've now got 3 launched, with 3 coming along as well, and we're just waiting for O2. So it's really interesting to see that when we talk to these people about, did the program accelerate your thinking? Has it helped? And it's difficult to prove that, but the conversations we have and the anecdotal evidence is, yes, this program is making a difference. It is making people think differently, and it is making the industry want to adapt this technology and roll it out early. So how does a program build? We've spent many a time scratching our heads about how to articulate how this program works. And ultimately what we're trying to do is create a bunch of phases that build momentum. So we started off earlier on with some university networks which have done some great things about proving the technology before the technology was really available. It wasn't generally available, it wasn't GA'd. And Bristol, King's and Surrey pulled together some test beds, and we demonstrated the first live 5G network at Mobile World Congress in 2018. And then from that we did phase 1, and I'll come on to those again later. But what we're really trying to do is look at various sectors and different parts of the UK economy to say, can 5G play in these spaces? And if we take, for example, Industry 4.0 and construction, we've done some projects in there with the urban connected communities, the other half of this program, where we're working with the West Midlands 5G, to create the conditions in an urban environment. We've done some work, we call it sectors in this slide, but we're pivoting that to industrial 5G, where the previous Secretary of State, Jeremy, before he went, and the new Secretary of State, Nikki, arrived, who announced that we were doing some work around manufacturing, further work around manufacturing, further work around logistics, because they're very key aspects of the UK economy. If we can get manufacturing sorted, there's 24 billion pounds to be unlocked in that just by applying some of this technology. And we've seen some great benefits from the Worcester project we're already running. We want to look at healthcare as well, agriculture, tourism, creative media, sport and culture. We are the Department for Culture, Media and Sport as well, so we've got to get sport and creative industries in there somehow, so we were looking at that. But there's also a layer of enabling that supports all of this, the technology, in terms of security standards. This week I was out with my colleagues from NCSC talking about how we build security into what we do, how we design it in there, how features and services we had in the past, are they still applicable in 5G? What new threats come from 5G? What benefits can we use? And how do we make sure that it's all secure? Because basically with 5G and the Internet of Things, we're generating a vast amount of data. How do we collect that data? How do we store that data? How do we turn that data into useful information? How do we make sure that that information is being used appropriately? So it's a huge field on its own. We're doing a lot of work with the policy people in DCMS as well, and that's kind of why the program sits in the policy area of DCMS in digital infrastructure, not within the building digital, like the LFFM program and the Superfast, because we're here to test policy. We take policy ideas, we apply it to certain areas. So we see with the rural connected communities, we're really starting to work how the outside-in part of the FTI, Artificial Telecoms Infrastructure Review, does it really work? How do we work with the Shared Rural Network initiative that's going on as well? What do we learn from this through barrier busting? How do we change that? So it's really starting to formulate the policy landscape of government, which is really interesting because you guys who are involved in this program and doing these trials feed back to us and we take the lessons, which then starts to inform policy. So we feel it's a much more powerful vehicle for influencing the way the industry should go forward. UK 5G that John just talked about. Again, very powerful group of people, lots of industry players in there across all sectors that we have here that bring a voice to the table and say, we think there's something 5G can do for us, be it tourism, be it creative industries, that we want to really come and have a look at that and see what we can do differently and advise on it and help change the landscape. So I talked about the University Test Network. This was the first end-to-end 5G demonstration, which was done at World Congress, where they had a very handsome chap there on the left kicking a ball who completely missed the goal, but the system had a robotic arm at the other end of the conference using a 5G connection, which then simulated the movement of my badly kicked ball, and that one actually went in the net. So you could argue that 5G didn't do a very good job there, but the point was the latency and the bandwidth of sending all that information over a distance to the other end was very good. We had the minister out with us, Margot at the time, and she was very impressed with what we'd seen. So that was the start of the 5G journey for the UK. We then launched the phase one, or a small portfolio of interesting projects, as we call it now, where we've looked at healthcare, we've looked at tourism, we've looked at agri-tech, we've looked at manufacturing, we looked at autonomous vehicles and vast amounts of data on the move from the AutoAir program. Some of you guys have been involved in it. I recognise some of the faces around here in the room that have been involved in the program beforehand. And it's fantastic to see you guys coming back and wanting to compete for the next phase, where we take all these learnings, we take all these initiatives that have happened, the technology we've deployed, and we can build it and we can scale on it and we can take it into new spaces. The urban connected communities, which is the adjunct to this one, where we're really looking at how we can change that urban environment, how we can create the right conditions for deploying small cells, for deploying, fixing mobility, fixing citizen wellbeing issues, accelerating the infrastructure rollout. And this week we had, and it's still ongoing today, a demonstrator up there, the application accelerator, which is a mechanism where people can come and get involved with the program, people who don't necessarily know how the technology works. They don't really know who to talk to. They've got an idea. They may be running a small business that has nothing to do with telecoms or nothing to do with technology in itself, but just wants to improve the way their business works because they've got this idea. How can they use that? How can they take that forward? And that application accelerator is exactly the place to go and have a look at and talk to the people there and find out how to get involved. Touched on security. We're doing a lot of work with the NCSC and GCHQ around that. We've got a collaboration with UK and Korea, which we are partnering in the UK with Cisco, leading a consortium for us, where we're looking at applications on rail. So part of what we're doing within the program is an international piece. How, although we want to lead and be a world leader in 5G, how do we capitalise on what other countries are doing and the work they're doing? So we're working with Korea on rail environment, and how can we re-engineer, how can we redevelop apps, how do we structure this in a way that provides a great user experience but may not necessarily need contiguous coverage, or it's done in a different way using different infrastructure on trains, for example. So for those of you commuting up today, I was chatting to one of my colleagues from DCMS just a minute ago saying we really do need to fix rail. We know that, and this is just one of those steps on the way to doing it. We want to look at transportation projects. We want to understand we're talking about rail. How about roads? Where does roads come into this? What technology we need on the roads? What kind of use cases will the road infrastructure have going forward? So that we know the policy we need to take, or decisions we need to make, where we need to focus our activities. And then finally, we'll talk about industrial 5G, which we've launched as well alongside this, where that competition closes in October. Again, looking at how we can improve on manufacturing, how can we improve on logistics, and I think with that certain little item out there, Brexit, logistics and how we make sure that's seamless and we can use technology in that is something very important moving forward. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour through the programme. Many of you are familiar with it already. I just wanted to reiterate it. We are here this afternoon. If you've got any questions, want to know anything about what's happening and what's coming up, then let us know. But other than that, thank you very much. Thanks for coming. And I'm really looking forward to reviewing all the bids that are going to come in, because that bit is absolutely fascinating for us, because there's lots of great ideas that get created, lots of people talking to people they wouldn't do beforehand. And from our perspective, it's absolutely really fascinating to see the clever applications and the clever use cases and the different ways of thinking about stuff that we wouldn't have thought of ourselves. So thanks for your engagement. Thanks for coming here. And that's it from me, I think.
Great. Thanks, Ian. The long walk back. And Ian will be around for some questions when we got the question and answer session. But I think we want to move on to the actual Rural Connected Communities competition briefing, and to tell you all about the scope and the background of the competition, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Paul Clegg from DCMS in the wings. Hello, Paul.
Hello. So Ian, you can go around this way. That's all right. Thanks everyone. Good to see some familiar faces from the workshops. Could I ask, before I start, this may be a bit cheeky, but how many of you are working on bids for RCC at the moment? Fantastic. And how many of you are thinking of working on a bid based on what happens today? Good, great, you're in the right place. Okay, so we launched a couple of weeks ago. The purpose of this session, we're not going to tell you anything new. What I'll be doing is drawing out key points from what we've published and giving you the opportunity to really interrogate that and ask us questions. So we'll split my section of the briefing into two. So first of all, the high-level scope of the competition, and then we'll get into the more detailed design parts of it, including competition process, application structure, eligibility criteria, and we'll have Q&A after each bit. If for whatever reason colleagues of yours haven't been able to make it to this session, we'll be putting everything online, including a recording, and also there'll be the mailbox, the 5G inquiries mailbox will be open until 2 weeks before the competition closes, and that'll be your vehicle to ask anything that you weren't able to ask today. So we'll endeavour to get back to you, detailed responses as soon as possible afterwards. So on to the scope of the project. Purpose of RCC is to support government's overall strategy for improving mobile coverage and driving successful implementation of 5G in the UK. And we want to do that through two approaches. So the first one, it's improving the business case for investment in rural network deployment by testing new, innovative commercial and technical solutions. That's for more efficient, cheaper, easier deployment of advanced network infrastructure, including 5G. And secondly, supporting the business case by proving building demand for 5G, for rural connectivity, through new use cases to incentivise investment. So it's making the case by showing the innovative approaches on the supply side that's possible through 5G, and also showing what demand there is for connectivity and how 5G can help meet that demand. This is running alongside work from the government, from DCMS, to improve mobile connectivity. So that's running alongside the 4G target of 95% coverage, and work around the shared rural network with MNOs that is ongoing, through 5G, investing in the next generation. Okay, so we see this as part of the whole departmental approach to improving connectivity. RCC should align with and benefit from our work to bust barriers. So how can 5G both be informed by that work, and how also can it help break down barriers in rolling out connectivity? And finally, this is not per se a network coverage rollout program. So the intention of this, it's not to increase 5G coverage across the UK. It's not designed to do that. It's not big enough to do that. What it is, it's a series of trials and test beds to de-risk and to inform future network rollout programs. Okay. So that's the high-level summary. Getting into a bit more detail of what we want to get out of the program. So 5G, we think, provides the opportunity to improve the extent, quality, benefits of connectivity in rural areas through those new use cases and through innovative commercial technical deployment solutions. The second ambition is 5G creates an opportunity for market expansion. So this follows on from what was in the Future Telecoms Infrastructure Review. So looking at new entrants, market expansion, because 5G creates an opportunity in the type of wireless services available and in the number of providers of networks and services. So that's including new approaches to managing access to spectrum, for example. Thirdly, we think that use cases will help demonstrate demand from a variety of economic sectors and rural communities for 5G tech. So we think these use cases are expected to show a combination of socio-economic benefits, creating a stronger case for investment. So again, it's building the evidence base, building the business case for investment. Use cases will also serve to drive increased levels of technology innovation. So a key capability of 5G is, of course, its ability to integrate different access technologies and deliver a variety of services with very different service characteristics. So it's the technical nature of 5G that we want to explore through this program. 5G is also a key enabler of wireless expansion and innovation across a range of different sectors. As a result, helping generate a new and growing rural innovation ecosystem. So it's really building and enriching that 5G ecosystem, driving economic growth in rural communities, and leading to the delivery of improved, lower cost public services. And finally, 5G has been designed to provide higher levels of security than previous mobile technologies and offers a number of new security features. So that's our ambition, that's what we want to see RCC deliver. So who do we want to be involved in the project? So it's open to consortia, and we'll talk a bit more about what we mean by consortia in the more detailed session later on. Consortia from across the UK remains a UK-wide programme. Organisations without a UK presence are very welcome to participate in the delivery of RCC, but we can't give them money. So a non-UK organisation without a UK presence could well be part of a consortium in some capacity, but would not be eligible for DCMS funding. And in terms of who should be in a consortium, there are some prescriptions set out in the proposing consortium section of the guidance, which we'll come on to. But beyond that, we're fairly agnostic, to encourage innovation as much as possible within the parameters of the nature of the project. We are very open to seeing different constitutions of consortia, different organisations coming together to meet specific problems in their locality. So we're expecting consortia to be a mixture of public and private organisations, academia, third sector organisations. Money. So originally we were looking at funding around 4, 5, 6 projects. Our ambition now is to fund up to 10 projects. We've got a £30 million budget, so we are possibly looking at a range of different amounts of funding going to each project. So the reason for the scale, the 2 to 5 million, is that we are open depending on what type of bids we receive. So if you want to aim towards a higher end of the scale, then so be it. We'll take that into view when we're assessing bids. So roughly 2 to 5 million for that number of projects within that envelope of funding. Funding can only be given to proposals that satisfy the criteria for the R&D category of experimental development, which basically means it's kind of halfway through the technology readiness scale. So it's using existing knowledge and skills and applications, but in new, innovative ways. Yeah, so there's a definition in the guidance, a specific definition, but it's an R&D category for innovative project, but it's not starting from scratch. It's not lab-based. It's stuff that can be applied and deployed out in the real world. Our funding, it's capital. So any costs you claim for our funding need to be capitalised and or treated as capital. Given that we are bound by state aid regulations, there has to be a degree of match funding. So it's roughly, on average, a 1-to-1. So for every £1 we give you, you give us £1, but it depends on what type of organisation you are. So a small business will receive 60% of their costs from us. A medium-sized business, half. A larger business, 40%. Local authorities, other public sector organisations, 100% of their claim costs. And then the rules around research organisations differ slightly. Universities up to 80% they can claim of their total economic costs, and all other research organisations, such as catapults, up to 100%. So there's much more detail on this in the associated documentation that we published, but we can pick it up in Q&A. Bit more on funding. So if you are successful, for RCC funding, then there's a process then that has to be followed, which will be set out in a grant funding agreement. There's a template that we published alongside the documentation. So that's a condition of funding. You have to agree to the terms of the grant funding agreement. All DCMS funded activities to end by 2021-22 financial year, so 31st March 2022. We reserve the right to extend, as we've done for some of the phase 1 projects. That's not a guarantee. There must be a lead partner. So for any funding, there needs to be an identified organisation within the consortium, an accountable body to receive and distribute any DCMS funding that is awarded. And that organisation must be responsible for that distribution of funding. And finally, on this slide, collaboration. So one of the, I think Ian touched upon it, a really crucial underpinning component of the 5G test beds and trials programme. It's about building the ecosystem. It's about enriching the UK's 5G ecosystem. It's about learning from, sharing lessons, improving collectively, collaboratively, just building our international presence, making this country kind of a leading champion of 5G. So we are mandating that we will need to see proposals for collaboration with other projects, with existing projects, with other 5G related activities, and that should make up 2 to 4% of the DCMS funding. Okay. Key dates and deadlines. So the competition's been running for a couple of weeks. Clarification questions. So following on from today, as I said, the mailbox will be open until the 27th of September. Competition closes 12 PM on the 25th of October. If you miss that, then unfortunately we can't look at your bid. So please, if you're planning on bidding, just don't forget. Make sure that your IT system's not going to crash. We'll let the shortlist know by mid-November. Interviews back end of November into early December. Then, subject to ministerial approval on the winners, we will let you know by the end of the year if you are successful or not, with a view then to starting grant funding agreement to sign off due diligence, mobilisation from January next year. So that's the end of that first bit. Questions?
Thanks, Paul. Now, I would like you to stay there. And I'm going to moderate the questions.
Because
Okay.
we are, that's not live, John, trust.
It's not live.
Oh, it is.
It is live. Because we're filming today, and as Paul said, it's going to be a record. I suppose I'd just ask of you 2 things. One, if you have questions, please wait for the mic. Please say your name and which organisation you're from. And 2, just please make sure there's a question mark at the end of what you say at the end of the question, just so that we capture true questions rather than comments. And just before we start, Paul, I had a few questions that I'm going to ask you first. So you talked about the 2 to 4% allocated towards collaboration. Mm-hmm. Is that a mandatory thing that applicants have to put in?
Yeah.
Okay, so as part of their application, they need to allocate from the grant funding 80 to 200k, depending on the size of the grant that they're asking for.
And that will need also to be match funded.
Match funded, yeah.
So there's a list of collaboration. there's a list of key things that we as government are interested in where we'd like to see you collaborating in the guidance document.
Sure, so it's mandatory, so it's really important.
Yeah.
And the second thing which leads on from your answer really was when you're talking about the 2 to 5 million, that's the amount of grant funding.
DCMS grant funding.
Yeah, so given the fact that this is a match funded competition, actually projects need to, you know, they
be up to 4 to 10 million.
Yeah. And if people wanted to put in a £20 million project or a £50 million project from industry, they can do so, but the maximum grant you're expecting is about 5 million per project.
Yeah. So if you want to put in 45 million more, great. But in terms of what DCMS can provide, it will be capped at that.
Okay, great. So there may be some more application, how to apply, eligibility questions later on.
Yeah.
But what I'd ask from people is if you have, are there any questions about the scope of the competition or about the background or any clarification that you need from Paul around what he's presented thus far? I think so. We've got Andy, you need to... Thank you, sir.
Hello. My name is Edward Trush from the Connected Communities Research Lab at Lancaster University Management School. One of the many challenges in preparing a bid is actually deciding on the scope of the bid and the project itself. And we've got a range between £2 and £5 million contribution from DCMS. Do you have any advice in terms of, in some ways, where one should pitch within that range, or if one actually has a multi-level bid, so that so one doesn't miss out by simply making the project too large or too small? Does that come out of the negotiation, perhaps?
Thanks, Edward. So any clues on that?
So, I don't mean to sound like a civil servant, but I am. So, the funding envelope, the funding suggestion is there, what we will provide. We need you to look at what your use cases are, what your solutions are, what your area is, and present to us a proposal that is proportionate and makes sense. So if it's 2 million here doing this, that's great. If you think it's ambitious enough, it's large enough to be larger than that, so be it. We will be considering a whole portfolio of projects. Our intention is to look at a range of projects, small to large. So the reason we set that range is so as not to limit. You know, we're interested in different scales of projects in different areas, looking at different things. So the answer is, it's kind of up to you what you think you're capable of funding. You won't be, if you are ambitious, if you want to put in a bid seeking, you know, £5 million, £7 million, if you're super ambitious, if you want to risk it, fine. But really, it's up for you to make that judgment, I think.
Okay, thank you. So I think you presented the objectives of the programme, and if there are projects that come in that are too small a scale that you don't, or you and the assessors don't feel will meet the objectives, then obviously that's going to be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, the criteria are set out in the document. So there's nothing about scale necessarily in the document. It's the right type of rural location. You've got the right type of consortium. You're looking at interesting, innovative use cases, using new solutions. You know, that's your interest. We haven't stipulated how big or how small beyond the range of funding.
Paul, I'm going to press you a little bit because on the projects, which isn't necessarily about scale, but when you talk about the desire to have user cases to stimulate the market, what have you heard when you talk to mobile network operators or service providers about what they need from these projects? You know, what are they looking for? Highly specific business models? Are they looking for exciting business models? Are they looking to make a buck? What's their driver that you think will work?
M&O is looking to make a buck. So the purpose of this program, largely, it's to show how you can do things more cheaply, more easily with 5G. So there's a reason why there's a lack of investment in telecoms infrastructure in some rural communities. It's because it's hard, it's difficult. If through your bid you can demonstrate actually it is possible, or there is demand, there are these use cases, you can use 5G in this way, then that's going to make investment in future deployments more attractive to MNOs and other network providers. So I think when I say scale, you know, these bids are pretty tough, they're pretty hard, we're asking quite a lot from you. But in terms of what your solution is, it's what demonstrates really, really well why what you're doing is different and special and can make a difference.
Great, thanks, Paul. We've got a question over here.
Hi, Paul. John Veazey from the SAT Applications Catapult. Just a question around what happens in the sort of the January period and onwards. You talked about the need to allow for some funding around collaboration. Is it the expectation of the bid that we should identify the other bids that we're willing to collaborate with, or would that happen once everything's awarded? And then just a follow on in terms of January, Ian mentioned that for West Midlands, they needed to create a West Midlands 5G. Is that the same expectation for RCC, that a new entity would need to be created?
So I think that the second part of your question is somewhat easier to answer. No. I think given that we're looking at more and slightly smaller projects in UCC, that kind of delivery vehicle, it's not really what we're looking for. And in answer to the first part, we are looking for plans in your bid about what you could collaborate on, with whom potentially you could collaborate. But once successful projects have been selected, then we'll take that approach to really specify through the grant funding agreement and individual delivery plans opportunities for more detailed collaboration.
I thought for the phase 1 projects, there was a really good event that was run at the Oval, Topical, where all of the successful projects, the 6 projects in phase 1, were brought together. And in my opinion, that kind of kick-started a sense of community for all those projects, whereby you could have those conversations around collaboration, and some great things have happened, you know, the shared infrastructure, security, that kind of stuff. So I know that you're planning to do something around that.
We are, Thanks, John.
Andy, there's a question over there, and then we'll come back over there. Oh, right, okay,
Hi, I'm Bob Stewart. I'm from 5G Rural First in Strathclyde. So you mentioned SRN, and I noticed it was mentioned earlier, the Shared Rural Network. Could you tell us if that's going to be related to RCC, or if it's going to be, you know, support funded by RCC Treasury, and any other information you might be able to give us on it?
So all I can say is that conversations are ongoing with MNOs about the Shared Rural Network. New ministers remain as committed to working with them, and MNOs remain as committed to working with us on helping to achieve our 95% target. It's an entirely separate programme. So that is a pure 4G rollout programme, we hope, and RCC is more about testing use cases, technological innovation, new commercial models. So whereas longer term, SRN will help to bring about full rural coverage, RCC is specifically designed as a standalone different project that may help inform future rollout.
Okay. Got a question here.
Simon Rockman from Cambridge Wireless Journal. With the phase 1 projects, some were regional, like Worcester, Millbrook, Bristol. Some were dotted around the countries, like 5Grid and Rural First. Do you have a preference?
No. Either. So except on the latter, there needs to be a clear rationale for why you're dotted around. If you've got that, if you've got a good, clear reason why you have sites that are in disparate locations, fantastic.
And just to sort of press you a bit further on that, you'll be taking a portfolio approach. So regions won't be designated areas for funding, but when you think about which projects get funded, you'll naturally be thinking about a portfolio approach, a bit like Ian's temple, which is where are the different sectors that people might tick, or that kind of stuff.
So when it comes to shortlisting, interviewing and selecting successful projects, with all things being equal, we would be looking to have a variety, a range of locations, a range of types of projects across the UK.
And I don't think that's anything that anyone looking to put a proposal in can game or anything like that, because it just depends on what comes in. So I guess the advice is just focus on the user cases that you really want to take forward, rather than trying to game the competition, right? There's a question just down here.
Thanks. Michael Armitage, Broadway Partners. This may be a very small question, easily answered, or it may not. But there was a specific reference to the need for all claimed expenses to be capital or capitalised, and I'm not an accountant, so I need a little help on understanding what that means practically, and what's the purpose behind that.
The purpose is that our funding is capital. So we can only give you capital, and there are strict treasury rules that you can only spend capital on capitalisable things. We can get into the guidance. It's been published. We can maybe get into the detail a bit later, if that would be helpful, separately. It's all in here. It is quite detailed about how you can demonstrate things are capitalisable and what is capital, but maybe that's something to pick up offline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman here in the middle, and then we're going to move over here. Yeah, sir, yeah.
Ivan Marjanovic, 5 Rural First. Will MNOs be mandated to cooperate or to work with the RCC going forward?
So anyone who doesn't receive funding, will we make them work with RCC projects? No. So it's a condition of our funding that you collaborate with others. We can't enforce others to collaborate with you.
Sir.
Jeremy Leggett from Matchon with Communities in Rural England. You said that the local authority match funding rate was 100%. Is the same true for third sector and civil society organisations? And if you have a multi-sector consortium, does each part of that consortium effectively claim on the basis of the percentage for the sector that they're in, or the percentage of the sector that the lead partner and accountable body is in?
So each member of the consortium claims according to the rules applicable to them as individuals. So say within a consortium with a local authority, they would get all the money, a medium-sized business would get half the money, a university 80%, so it depends on individual members of the consortium. On your point on what funding a third sector organisation would receive, I don't know, I don't want to wing it. We'll find out and let you know. And we'll publish it online as well, so we can see. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think you updated the Q&A on this competition this morning, so I think it's an important point, which is that if you do have questions, please do use the inquiries email address, and then the inquiries team, when they scratch their heads and come up with an answer, will then publish that for everyone. So actually it's a really helpful way, I think, of making sure, you know, don't feel if you leave today and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, then there is another way to ask questions and to get those published.
And John, if I could just add, so the inquiries team has access to all the commercial, legal, financial expertise within the overall programme, so we will get you, a clear, definitive answer to any of these quite detailed, specific questions through that route.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Hi.
Great, okay, thank you.
Jim Plunkett-Cole from Smart Growth Analytics. You mentioned about the right types of rural locations. Could you say a bit more about that? Is it specifically the government official rural areas?
Yeah.
Do they go down to, is it local, lower level, super output areas?
It's postcode level.
Postcode level.
Yeah, so it's in the guidance, but for each home country, it's a little bit different. So we've listed a table in the guidance of the definition that we're looking bids to match.
And Jim, all of the guidance documents, if you haven't seen them, I think Paul gave you a screenshot, but they're all up on gov.uk, and there's a lot of intricate detail about what constitutes the definitions around rural. But again, if there are any questions, the inquiries team can pick that up. Sir.
Hi, Colin Wood. We're from Dorset Council, which is the new unitary authority for the rural part of Dorset. One of the things where we'd like to lead a bid, but the procurement rules around local authority purchasing are long-winded, to say the least. Because we might be in a partnership with a industry partner, does that get round that problem? Because obviously the timescales for delivery are quite short. And if not, are we better off letting somebody else be the lead partner? That's my question.
That's a great question, Jim.
Yeah. So a business partner could be given the freedom to manage the economic expenditure activity within a consortium, allowing the lead organisation to have that strategic oversight. So in that instance, an industry member could pick that up, giving you the freedom to bring everyone together and drive forward the project. If you weren't comfortable with that, then you could nominate the industry rep, say, as the lead, and allow them to receive the grant funding and disperse it as appropriate. And your role would be whatever you chose to define it as. What we're looking for is somebody with the authority locally, though, to bring partners together with good project management, good leadership, good stakeholder skills. So that's why local authorities are well placed in many instances, but there may be occasions where it makes more sense for your industry partner to lead the consortium.
Okay, thanks, Paul. We've got a question from those registered online. Andy, if you'd like to.
Okay, we've got a question from Rebecca Lewis. Funding eligibility rates of different types of organisation is understood, but does it have to average out at 50% across the whole project?
No, so we kind of use the one-to-one as an average, so it will depend. If you have, say, two big organisations, two large organisations within a project, then they would each be eligible to just 40%.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? One over here? Yeah, thank you.
Phil Marston, NCC Group. Can you elaborate a bit on the security projects? I think it's a good point that Ian said earlier.
Yeah, so I think we'd be looking for evidence of how you're using the benefits of 5G within your project to improve the security of a network using existing good practice, how particularly 5G can make a difference, what your kind of long-term risk management is for your network and its security implications. So dotted throughout the guidance are key points, say, in your delivery plan, in your risk management. There are elements around security, so it's kind of being mindful of that. So whereas security, it's one of our ambitions, it kind of runs throughout the whole project. So we'd be looking for, you know, good evidence of strong security, strong applications of security around 5G within any proposal. If you want more detail about what exactly that entails, we can again pick that up via the inquiries box. If you've got very specific questions about different security parameters, definitions, we can kind of give advice from our security expert within the team.
And those are that's really about security of the suggested user cases,
yeah,
rather than companies being certified for cyber essentials, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that would help.
Yeah.
But actually, it's about security of the user cases.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
That's it.
There's one over here.
Oh, yeah. Was it John?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all right. Don't apologise.
John Veazey again from the Satellite Application Catapult. Would you be happy for an NHS trust to play a similar role or an alternative role to a local authority where they have a regional responsibility or regional rural coverage?
Yes.
Good. I mean, I think today's briefing, as I mentioned in the intro, is the result of quite a lot of collaboration in June. Mm-hmm. We ran 5 or 6 workshops across the UK in June, and I think some of the questions that people had then around what sorts of organisations could lead and what scenarios give potential applicants the most flexibility around delivery cropped up then, and I think it's very sort of gratifying to see that you've taken that on board and listened to a lot of those. So I want to use that as a segue. If there are no further questions, I want to use that really as a segue to another topic that came up at the workshop, which is around spectrum, which is absolutely vital. And we've had a question around that earlier around shared spectrum. But after the networking break, we're going to be hearing from Ofcom about the latest developments and latest thinking around spectrum, around 5G and other initiatives. So look, now we have a break for 20 minutes. So please be socially promiscuous and form some partnerships. Andy?
Pictures and presentations to me.
Come to Andy if you want to get up on stage and pitch your organisation. We'll call you back in about 20 minutes and then proceed with the rest of the briefing. So thanks very much, and thanks to Paul. Thank you. So there was a brilliant buzz out there for teas and coffees, so I hope that the caffeination process worked, or the decaffeination process worked. The second part of this afternoon, if I know loads of people came up and spoke to Andy to present after the more formal information section. If you didn't get a chance to speak to Andy, but you still would like to present, you'll have an opportunity to do that, even if you don't have slides. So what we've got, Andy has a list of people who are down to present. They'll go first, and then Andy will make a call for a show of hands, and he'll ask you up to the stage. So what we don't want you to do is leave here thinking, oh, I wish I talked about my organisation or my project. So if you didn't get to him, don't worry. You'll get an opportunity to present and come up here a bit later. So I think, as I mentioned before the break, one of the key questions that was raised at the various different workshops that we ran for this competition to help design and scope it out back in June was the issue of spectrum. And I think it's quite often that industry feels that different governments or bits of the public sector sometimes don't talk to each other as well as they could. And I think I'm very pleased to say that one of the things that you told us back in June was the importance around spectrum as a potential challenge or opportunity or issue when putting in an application. And I'm pleased to say that we've got Ofcom here, Sue Yen from Ofcom. One of the important bits of the application process is there's a question that says, how will you get the spectrum required for you to carry out this project? And so I think that's where Sue Yen and Ofcom come in. So please welcome Sue Yen from Ofcom, and she's going to tell you all about it and how Ofcom can help you get the necessary spectrum for the project. Sue Yen.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Siyun Tan from Ofcom. I'm going to talk to you about spectrum. So we heard this earlier about the money required to run a successful trial. In addition to that, I think you will also need spectrum. And this is where Ofcom comes in. We manage the radio spectrum in the UK. But before I start, I'd like to thank UK 5G and DCMS for inviting us to come and to speak to you at your competition briefing event today. My presentation will mainly focus on our recent announcement in July, where we announced that we are allowing access to some spectrum supporting mobile technology, which includes the band awarded already licensed to mobile operators, as well as some 4 shared access bands where mobile spectrum is supported. I led that project in Ofcom. So I'm going to speak to you about the licensed product available and how you can apply for license for the band. I'm also going to touch upon the bands where you don't need to apply for license on, just to give you an overview on what you call a license exemption band. And finally, we also have a license called Innovation and Trial Licensing, which is quite relevant in terms of doing the trials, and we have been involved very heavily with all the previous trialists that we saw this morning that was involved in the first round of the 5G funding. So a little bit about Ofcom for those who don't know us. We have amongst a number of duties that we manage the radio spectrum in the UK. So under the Wireless Telegraphy Act, all radio equipment would need to have a license to operate from Ofcom, unless we make legislation to exempt the need from the equipment to hold a license. And as part of authorization radio equipment, we have a number of authorization model. I think one of the most well-known one is on the national award of national license to licensees such as in mobile band, such as mobile network operator. But we do also have a number of other mechanisms, such as individual licensing for a per base station basis and a local area licensing. And we have licensed all sorts of users ranging from ships to aeroplanes, amateur use, business radio, fixed links, and PMR users. We also, as I mentioned earlier, in certain cases where the use of radio equipment would not cause harmful interference, we make legislations to exempt them. The most widely known use cases that we know is on the Wi-Fi in the 2.4 and the 5 gig band. Ofcom are also very much as part of our statutory duties to promote and support innovations. So we have innovation and trial licensing available, particularly to support this sort of purpose. So I'm going to start with giving you an overview of our recent announcement on spectrum sharing. The key things to focus on is that our initiative is stemmed from two policy objectives, and we are pretty much in line with government in relation to our strategic priority to ensure that the UK, the citizen and consumer and the people and businesses in the UK can receive coverage across the whole country wherever you are. And improving mobile coverage is one of our key objectives to do that. We want to make sure that the regulatory approaches we put in place will encourage innovation and support them. So these two policy objectives underlines our work on the spectrum sharing. We have focused on the bands supporting mobile technology and also access to bands which has been awarded to the mobile operators. And particularly recognizing that these bands has international global standards, and so there is a good availability of equipment ecosystem available to support them. Our approaches are underpinned by two different licensed products, and we have that because the bands that we have identified 4 bands for what you call the shared access. And these are primarily bands which are managed by Ofcom. It's about the mobile technology or adjacent to one. And the 38242 and the lower 26 gigahertz band both supports 5G technology. We see this as key to enable new entrant into the market, new player, SMEs, to be able to access spectrum for a variety of 5G use cases on a cost-effective, in a way with a lower barrier of entry to access the spectrum. The other approach on the spectrum license product we are making available is what you call a local access license. So we recognize that there are some unused spectrum in the bands that we have that has been licensed on a national basis to mobile network operator. And we wanted to create a way to make it simple for this unused spectrum to be, opportunity for this unused spectrum to be exploited. So we are putting forward a new licensed product that would enable access in those locations where it does not impact on the incumbent use or their future plan use. So I put a website here. So this is the link to the Ofcom website that contains our recent announcement in July. It also contains a number of documents that we publish alongside them. So first, I'm now going to touch upon the shared access license. So these are the licensed product that Ofcom will make available by the end of this year. It is a managed access. So you apply to Ofcom to access spectrum on a first-come, first-served basis. The principle is that we want to make it easy and simple for people to access spectrum in the location that they need them. And we want to provide a range of spectrum options to suit your needs. So how it would work is that, towards the end of the year, we will be updating our website that will contain the application form and the associated guidance documents. You tell us the locations in which you are looking to provide service, the bands that you need, the number of channels, and the size of bandwidth that you require. We will then assess the interference both to existing users in the band and also from existing in the users of the band. So this will give you a spectrum with a managed quality of service that would be better than what you would operate in a licensed exempt environment. The license is, so if the technical coordination is successful, we will issue you a license upon payment of an annual license fee. The license starts from £80 per license. And in the 1800 and 2300 megahertz band, there is one channel available. So you pay for £80 per license per year. And the 38 to 42 gigahertz band, there are a range of channels available from 10 up to 100 megahertz. And it starts from £80 and up to £800 for a 100 megahertz license. And for the 26 gig license, these are available for indoor low power use. And it starts from £320 per license for the different bandwidth, which is from 50 to 100 and 200 megahertz. One thing to note is that our objective is to ensure that everyone could get access to spectrum, but we also want to make sure that spectrum is used efficiently and are available to others if it's not being used. So there is a requirement that you would have to put you have to bring the service into deployment within 6 months of obtaining the license. If failure to do so may result in Ofcom revoking your license with 1 month's notice. So the link here shows we have created a guidance document, hopefully to explain all you need to know about the shared access license and how you can apply for them with the technical conditions and other small prints. So do have a look at them, and if you have any questions, please email us at this email address. It comes to me. So under the shared access license, we are offering two variant, and this is differentiated by a low power and a medium power license. The low power license is designed to ensure to provide coverage in like a private network or for example for an indoor coverage. This license gives users the flexibility to deploy as many base stations that you want within a location that you give to Ofcom, and that location is a point and the area within 50-meter radius from the point that you provided to Ofcom. For the medium power license, this is what we call a per base station license. So this allows a higher power up till 42 dBm per carrier. So we generally will limit the availability of this license in the rural area only, primarily because a higher power would mean that there will be a larger sterilization area, and we want to make sure that you are not denying other users the use of the spectrum, and the risk of denying other users is lower in the rural area. At the moment, as I said earlier, the 26 gigahertz license is only available for low power indoor. And for the medium power license, we have the 1800 and the 38242. Initially, we expect the availability of 2300 license for medium power to be limited, given that we have to have ongoing discussion with the Ministry of Defense on the coexistence with their system. So the second product that we are offering is what we call the local access license. And these are the licenses that give you access to the spectrum that has been licensed to the mobile network operator. It covers all the bands that has been licensed, what we call covers under all the band under the mobile trading regulations, which is the bands that we have awarded so far. And the approach that we are taking here is slightly different, given that the spectrum is managed by the operators. So we will coordinate any requests to use their spectrum with the operator. So users can approach Ofcom and to tell us what they are planning to deploy, the associated technical requirement, as well as some evidence to show that the spectrum is not being used by the relevant operator in the band that they're interested in. We will conduct some assessment and then have a discussion with the mobile network operator. And if they have not raised any reasonable objection, then we will grant you a license. So this license has a default period of 3 years, and which carries off a one-off charge of £950. You can apply for, if you have agreement with the network operator to deploy for a longer period, then we can grant a license that reflects the agreement that you have with the relevant operator. And for this license, you can start to apply now. In fact, we have just issued a license for a use case in a rural area with one network operator, and we are currently assessing another one. So the guidance and the application form can be found here, and there's an email address if you want to have any questions relating to application for this. I'm also going to touch on spectrum where for equipment that you don't need a license on. When we talk about 5G, we talk about 5G being both a mobile technology as well as a technology that brings together, can integrate a number of other access technology to form a virtualized end-to-end network. So we always get questioned on license exemption. So I'll just give you a snapshot on the number of bands here that's available for license exemption. So I've categorized it by the lower 1 gigahertz band spectrum. I think there's the lower three, so the second pink line is the 876 megahertz band, and the third one is the 921 megahertz band, and the first one is the TV white space band. I think there's a bit of and these are the spectrum that could be available for wideband IoT applications. I'm also putting here the 57 to 71 gigahertz band. Ofcom has made regulations to exempt the need to hold license in the band. I think we were the first last year, and we were the first one in Europe to do that. And in fact, the work in Europe has just concluded to finalize technical conditions that harmonizes the use of this band on a license exemption basis. So it would be available across the whole Europe on a license exempt basis. 2 years ago, we have also extended the top 5.8 gigahertz band. We made available additional 125 megahertz of spectrum for Wi-Fi. And finally, I've also highlighted in orange the bands available for fixed wireless access. We knew of trials going on using the 57 to 71 gigahertz band for millimeter wave fixed wireless access, and similarly for the UHF TV white space. So if all else fails and there's no suitable licensed product available, so there's always the innovation and trial license. And this is intended for research, development, and trial purposes. You can apply for innovation and trial license in any bands. There are 2 types of license available. The first one is the innovation and research license, primarily for product development and research and for scientific development. And the second one is the demonstration and trial license, and this is where you're looking to do a demo of the radio or to do a trial. Both license carries a cost of £50 per location, and you can have the license for a maximum of 1 year, in which you would have to reapply. There is no guarantee that you may get your application. Your application may be approved after 1 year. It depends on the other users that we have to coordinate with to ensure that there is no harmful interference. I've included here a link that will contain more information on the application process and the guidance document, and also the email address if you have any question. Thank you.
Stay there, Ian, because we're going to take some questions. Paul, I know you're drinking coffee, but do you mind if you come up to the stage as well? Because I think we're going to take some questions, and I imagine there'll be questions not just about spectrum allocation generally, but I think there'll probably be spectrum allocation in reference to the competition. Okay, so if you could join Ian here. The other couple of things I'd like to say as well is all of the slides from today we will be publishing on UK 5G, and I think they'll probably be on the gov.uk competition page as well. So as well as forwarding you around details, contact details for people attending today, we'll also, after today, forward you a link to all of the slides presented. That's all of the official slides, the DCMS ones and the Ofcom ones. So if you didn't get a chance to take a photo, then don't worry, because those will be up on UK 5G. I had a couple of questions, and they're mainly competition questions, but they relate to access. And Ian, you mentioned 6 months, use it or lose it kind of thing going on there. So that raised in my mind a question about the sequencing, which is that do you need to have secured licenses from Ofcom before you put in an application, or you just describe that you're going to do that?
So it's the latter. So we need to see demonstration that you have the network and the spectrum you need to deliver your project, or a clear plan about how you're going to get that network and that spectrum to deliver your project. That needs to be in your bid. And then as we progress through the competition process, if you get far enough, then we'd want to see those detailed plans.
Great, thank you. Now, I've got another question about gaming, which is a competition question. I'm sure there will be spectrum questions. So, if I was a potential applicant, I'd be weighing up the option of going for an innovation and research license, which is, and you suggested it's relatively easy to get that, versus getting another one of the licenses. And the reason why I might go for getting one of the other licenses is because one of the criteria for scoring the application is potential sustainability. And the innovation license is time limited, whereas the others, subject to the 6 months, sort of, it sounds like you have a better chance of maintaining and keeping that license. I wonder whether either of you got any thoughts about which license people might want to apply for. Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So my colleague leading on, we have supported, so what I can say is that we were very heavily involved in the first DCMS trial, and we have managed to secure most of the spectrum needed to do that trial. Obviously, the reason our policy is that we offer 1-year license is because there is no guarantee on the usage of the spectrum. But it's really for you to think about the relevant technical conditions and the use cases that you're looking to use the spectrum for.
Yeah, Paul, I think you're nodding, so
yeah,
you concur with that.
I think that sounds right. I think the new options from Ofcom allow a bit more flexibility in the type of spectrum you may be thinking of using. I think previously when we first started thinking about RCC, it was either talk to an MNO and try and collaborate with them, or use a trial license. I think now there are more options for you when you're considering what kind of network you want to run, and I think what you choose will be dictated by the kind of use cases that you're looking at, but also kind of factoring in the sustainability when DCMS funding expires.
Great, thank you. We've got at least 2 questions. So, again, just say who you are and where you're from, and that'd be
Hello, yeah, I'm James Birdie from Telep Research. I think I'm one of the 2 teams actually with our local access license application in there, but I don't think we're the one who's got the license, and I want to know why. Because I think we were first to get ours in. But anyway.
Hang on, no, that's not fair.
That's not
that's not fair.
That's not a question. Yeah, I've got a concern, and the question is all about how you handle this. With the shared access spectrum licenses, you've got a first come, first serve system in place. I'm just wondering how we manage that when there are lots of people in a built-up area who want to make use of this spectrum? And tacking on there, perhaps I can suggest that perhaps managing the spectrum not just in the frequency domain, but also in the time domain might be an answer.
James, you're talking about a built-up area and the competitions around rural.
Well,
I just wonder, is your question still valid for the competition?
Well, yes, it is, because they're all tied together. Okay, well, wait, I've got another one, which is totally aimed at the rural areas. One of the challenges that we noticed when we put in our application is that the whole procedure is based around you nominating precise locations for each one of the transmitter sites. Now, one of the problems that we have is that we are aiming to cover an area. Therefore, we don't know precisely exactly where those transmitters are going to go. So what we want is a regime where we can submit an application for an area, which you can do with the T&D license, but you can't do with the local access licensing. Can you comment on that, please?
So you're referring to the local access license, which is the access to the bands, the mobile spectrum, license to the mobile network operator? Yes. So the process for that is quite open, because the whole thing is that we don't know. We want to give maximum flexibility to users on the kind of users that they are going to use the spectrum for. But one of the key consideration in all this, if you put yourself in the other end of the MNO side, a lot of it relates to risk of interference. So in order to do the assessments, you would have to have some idea of, so you would expect to have a business case in the use cases that you're looking to provide. And we would assume that as part of the business case, there will be some element of network planning involved to demonstrate that the usage in that location will not have an impact on the incumbent license use. So what we would say is that the more information and the more thought you give in relation to that, the more likely that the application will be smoother to consider for both sides.
Yeah, thank you. Jay, I think what you've heard Paul and Xu say is that the type of access to spectrum depends on the user case, that Ofcom is doing its darndest to try to free up spectrum where possible, but sometimes the option may be to choose an MNO as an alternative to go for a license. Is that right? No. No. So our applications are open for MMOs to be partners. So I think that is right. Whether or not you want to do that or not, I think there's flexibility in who you partner with to get access to spectrum.
And obviously, if you have that partnership with the MNO, then the application for us should be quite straightforward. It will just be granting an access to giving you a license to operate in an area where you already have an agreement with the relevant MNO as your partner.
Yeah. So I think flexibility is we're trying to do a bit of flexibility around whether or not you might want to or take a different route. But I think that's what these guys are saying. Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Thank you. We'll take another question, sir.
Hi. Raj Sivalingam from WHP Telecoms. Hi, Sue, and thank you. It's a good portfolio of options for us to think about. So thank you for that. My question is about the 26 gigahertz, which, as you said, initially you're offering indoor licenses, but eventually you will be, I know you haven't decided whether to auction or how, national or not, but how will it pan out when you then come to make access to 26 gigahertz for wider area outdoor applications. Will the indoor licenses continue, or?
Yes. So our key consideration in the policy for this is to ensure that there is regulatory certainty, to provide investment certainty. And one of the reasons we have designed the 26 gig access is in such a way that it does not preclude the future opportunity for the use of the band for future outdoor high power wide area network. We expect that any licenses already granted will be able to continue given the technical evidence that suggests the ability to coexist.
Thank you. There's a question there.
Hi there, Lefteris Benekos from Entity Data. I was wondering, I have two questions if it's okay. I was wondering, on the one hand, for the shared spectrum with MNOs, for the spectrum they already own, what incentives are there for the MNOs to accept, to give up a part of their spectrum in an area? And my second question is dynamic spectrum allocation something that could be in scope of this? If a proposal requires something to interact with dynamic spectrum allocation, would Ofcom consider that?
So I think the first question should come to you, Paul, because you're running a competition to incentivize and develop new user cases such to stimulate the market. So I'm going to throw the first question to you, if I don't mind, and the second one to you, Cian. Why should MNOs give up or get involved in a project?
I think because MNOs want to be involved in this now. Our conversations with MNOs demonstrate quite a lot of interest from them. They see RCC as a good thing. They see the opportunity to get involved from the beginning in something that could well give them a competition advantage later on. So I think as this project is developed, it's been delayed a little bit, but I think one of the benefits to that is that the 5G ecosystem's now moved on to such an extent that for an MNO to be involved in a program like this is to their benefit.
Cian, the second question.
Can you repeat the second question? I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, we might have to move the mic back.
Yeah, sorry.
Or if you shout out, I'll repeat the question so we have it on film. So I think the question was, are there options beyond those that Huyen presented?
So what we said in our July statement is that we are looking to transition, to evolve into what we call an automatic frequency assignment, because we believe that that leads to more efficient use of the spectrum. So if there's any use cases or trials that you're looking to do that, I think obviously we are not involved with it, but it sounds like a great way to look at to test the proof of concept and how things may work out.
Yes.
That sounds to me, just so I clarify, is if that's in your bid, that would be very interesting to Ofcom. Should people rely on that being available, or actually should they have a plan A with that as a plan B?
It's always good to have a plan B.
Okay, so there you go.
Because I think the dynamic spectrum is a way to access spectrum in a more efficient way. But I suppose there is a separate question on the business case that would benefit from the dynamic access and the associated issues. I think there's a wider issue in terms of the business case.
Sure, yeah, great, thank you. There's a question here somewhere.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm David Burns. I represent 3 different organisations, so I've got a slightly longer introduction, I'm afraid. I'm the chair of UK WISPR, the UK Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. I'm the MD of Boundless Networks, and we have a fixed wireless access network with about 300 distribution points in the north of England. And I'm also the MD of a company called Wireless Coverage, which does real-time, high-performance wireless modelling using GPU acceleration and fixes some of the problems that you mentioned earlier on. A quick advert there. My question
thanks,
is,
Dave.
my question is around the local access license. So you mentioned if we've got a relationship with the MNO, we might be able to speed up the process and simplify the process by working with them when it comes to the application. But if we haven't, and I want to get, I don't know, 40 megahertz of spectrum somewhere in the 3-point-something gigahertz band, will Ofcom effectively contact each of the operators that has licensed spectrum within that band and then try to come up with the best proposal for us? How would you actually work if we don't have that relationship?
So how does the brokering happen?
So what we are saying is that our aim is to make it easy for people to access spectrum. And one of the things is, MNO is a big organization. You may not know who to contact, and your email will probably get lost in translation, as opposed to us being doing the brokering. A lot of it, as I said earlier, depends on the information provision. So a lot of it put the onus on the users to identify that the spectrum is not being used. You mentioned about the 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz band. So what we said in the statement is more likely that the bands that we have recently awarded, the likelihood of getting access in that band is probably lower, given that the MNOs may not have a firm plans in the use of the recently awarded band, as opposed to band where they have had holdings for a number of years, and it's quite clear that they have not had any usage in that.
Okay, anything to add, Paul? Thank you, David. The other thing is, because I know you're registered on UK 5G, some of the MMOs are registered there with individuals' contact details. So again, there might be an interesting place to look to make some connections. But I would have thought you personally have already got some connections in, but for others, it might be a useful place to go fishing for connections to MMOs. Okay, Andy. Yes, sir. Hi.
Simon from CW Journal.
Hi, Simon.
Radio's funny stuff. How do you define not being used? So if an MNO has a sniff of coverage in a place but not enough to do anything useful, will you turn around and say, no, you've got to give it to this innovative company to use because, yeah, you've got a bit of coverage, but it's not useful? Or will the MNO be able to say, no, sorry, you can't have it, we're already there?
So I think the onus again is that is there a coverage? If an area has a coverage and is being served by MNO, and it's quite unlikely that it's quite unlikely them to have evidence to say that the spectrum is not used in that location. But we do have cases where it's quite clear that you can find out that from technical measurement analysis of data, for example, that there is actually no coverage in a certain area, and demonstrate and provide evidence to that effect. And again, we always ask a question about when MNO could always turn around and raise objections. We have just introduced a product. We would have to gain from the experiences that we have as we go along with the application process and refine our experiences. And one of them may be that if we constantly have a refusal from the MNO, then it may be something that we would look to refine our process on. But again, we want to ensure that lack of spectrum is not a barrier, and therefore we are putting the initiative out as soon as possible. It's not perfect, but it's something that we will learn from, and as we progress, we will refine the process.
Thank you. I think the answer, Simon, is Ofcom always knows. So, are there any other questions? No? Great. Well, in that case, two things. First of all, Paul, you're going to stay on stage to go through the next presentation, which is how to apply. And thank you, Suyen. And you'll be around for questions. Please join me in thanking Suyen. Thank you.
This is getting into a bit more of the detail of the competition. So, competition process. Completed application forms, one per project, plus your allowed appendices. Make sure you include everything. As we go through this session, I'll try and highlight what you need to include, because one of the eligibility criteria is that you have to include everything. And also project finance forms, and that is one form per applicant, so one form per member of the bidding consortium. Those forms, completed forms, the application form, finance forms, to the mailbox by 12 p.m, that's 12 noon, midday, 25th of October. Then what happens is that from 12 noon, the 25th of October, we start the assessment process. So each bid will be assessed and marked against the questions set out in the application guidance. Questions on a scale of 0 to 10. We may go back to you with clarification questions if something's not clear. We will then shortlist and apply quality thresholds. So if you score a 1 or a 0 in any question, you're out. And anything with a total average score across the whole application of 5 or more will be considered for shortlisting. We do, though, reserve a right. This is all in the documentation, but for total transparency, you need to know, how the process will manifest and continue. So we reserve the right to be flexible if a bid is marginally lower, say, than 5, because an individual assessor is an outlier. So we will pick that up in moderation. If there's a high volume of bids meeting the threshold, we may change that threshold. And equally, if there's a low volume, we may change that threshold. Our intention is to spend as much of the money as possible on quality bids. So we've got a bit of flexibility around the shortlisting process. Then, top-ranked applications after shortlisting will be invited to interview. And that's by the 14th of November. We will go to you with a list of questions, topics we want to pick up in a bit more detail at interview, and ask for any more information that we feel maybe your bid didn't contain, or where we think maybe we need to know a little bit more. So if you don't get to the interview stage, then we will of course tell you and provide feedback. So interviews then 25th November to the 6th of December. Following interview, we will rank again in descending order based on total score. We mentioned before, but we will be taking a portfolio approach through this project. So with all things being equal, we will endeavour to fund up to the 10 projects that are over the bar that represent a broad range of projects across the UK, looking at different use cases, different approaches, different technological and commercial solutions, different types of geographical area, different types of community. We have the right to identify reserve applicants as well. And then following that process, following interview, following final shortlisting, subject to ministerial agreement, this is where ministers come back. So when we've identified those projects we think are eligible for funding, we will take them to ministers for a final decision, and we will aim to notify everyone by the end of this year. And then following that, we expect a period of due diligence with successful candidates, and that's to validate project scope, the delivery plan, looking at the grant funding agreement, picking up anything that we didn't pick up through the application process or at interview. This is a reason why we're looking for a lot of information from bids, looking to get a lot of information out of interviews, so that we can really kind of do this final part of the process quickly and effectively. We don't want to get bogged down because we kind of forgot to ask something, or you didn't supply something we thought was important, but we didn't phrase it in the right way. So after that period of due diligence, we would then aim to have projects up and running as early as possible next year. So that is the process from now until rollout. Eligibility criteria. So we have 4 eligibility criteria. So in your bid, you have to meet all the, then your application progresses no further. So there's the tedious but necessary stuff about the application format. So only use the form that's on the website. Only use the templates that's on the website. If anything's incomplete, if you've forgotten to include something, you're ineligible. The forms, don't alter them, convert them, don't kind of print them off, save them as PDF, submit them. We can't accept that. The reason for this, we're not trying to be draconian to make your life difficult, but we can't compare like to like if you start messing around with the formatting, if you start providing information in different ways, or you change the font size or whatever. So stick to the template and the presentation that we ask. Word count, we'll get onto word count in a bit. Anything more than the word count, we won't read. So don't go over the word count. You can include hyperlinks to other information where you think it is relevant, where you think it will help us make our decision. We may then take that into account, later on in the process, but it won't be part of your assessment. So anything additional you provide, it won't be part of the assessment. We may consider it, but what we need to see is what is set out here. Okay, so the other three eligibility criteria are around location, your consortium, and what is actually within your bid. So we mentioned location area. So we're still open, very much open to a variety of types of rural location. So really sparsely populated areas, so primarily natural or agricultural land use, to more populous, rural, semi-rural, urban edge areas with settlements, towns, villages. However, your proposals must clearly focus on rural services, communities and economies and the benefits to them, not on any urban areas that may be within your proposed region. So there can be urban areas within the region. An urban authority could be involved in a consortium, but the activity, the funded activity, has to take place in rural areas. And what do we mean by rural areas? Well, it can either be one area, one contiguous area, which could contain multiple local authorities, or it could be disparate, multiple separate rural areas, provided that you tell us why you're doing that. There may be a very good, strong rationale for why you're doing activities across different parts of the country. We saw this in some of the phase 1 projects. Very, very happy to see it again. And as for what we mean by rural, so each home country, as we mentioned earlier, has its own definition. That definition is in the application guidance, along with links to the definition, the metrics, exactly what we mean by rural. If anything of that is unclear, again, come to the inquiries mailbox. We will clarify if we think what you're proposing is rural. It's location. The next eligibility criteria is around the consortium. So we need, well, first of all, it's a consortium, so there has to be at least 2 organisations. Secondly, we need a clearly nominated, identified lead organisation able to manage the delivery of the project across the consortium, clear project governance and leadership, and that's the accountable body, that's the organisation that will receive the funding and distribute it. We are looking for public and private sector partnership, so we expect to see industry representation. And also we expect to see all local public sector bodies within that consortium that are responsible for any services or assets involved within the bid. Also areas within which planning permission will be required. So either we want to see them in the consortium or with clear evidence that they are committed to collaborate with that consortium. Public and private sector partnership. We've spoken about spectrum and network. We need to see it within the bid that you have the spectrum network to deliver your use cases, your proposals, or a clear plan to acquire or build them in a timely manner. And as I said, if the plan's there, then we'll pick that up as the competition progresses. We also want to see at least one organisation that's capable of owning and operating any 5G infrastructure or services within the area. We want to see at least one SME. And the definition of SME is the Cabinet Office definition of SME. Link is in the guidance again if there's any doubt about what exactly we mean. We want to see an operating and commercial model that is replicable. It's your kind of definition of what replicable is. The origin for this that, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeking to build the 5G ecosystem. We're seeking to demonstrate how the evidence base can build. So to do that, you need to demonstrate something that can be done in some form elsewhere. match funding, we've touched upon match funding, so the consortium has to have a plan in place for how it's going to provide its share of the funding for the project to complement the DCMS grant funding. Use cases, the penultimate bullet there, is that when you're thinking about use cases, we need within the consortium both somebody from the user side, so somebody who will benefit from that use case, but also somebody from the supplier side, so those providing the technology. So previously, from past learning of 5G projects, those two groups sometimes don't necessarily understand each other. So we want to see both voices represented in a consortium. We want to see the evidence that there are people there who know what the problem is in whatever, if it's in tourism or agri-tech, fishing, you know, remote utilities management, and also somebody who has the expertise to help find a solution to that problem. So both sides. And as well as that, we want to see within at least one use case the potential to create a viable and sustainable market opportunity. Okay, so we're not mandating you have to, with this use case, commercialize it upon the expiration of DCMS funding, but we want to see a commitment and ambition, you know, and an effort that a use case can be, is viable to develop to that extent. Finally, within the consortium, we need to see committed support, letters of support from all individuals within the group who have that decision-making and budgetary responsibility. So you want to see top-down, strong commitment to the consortium, high-level sign-off. Another slide about what we expect to see from a consortia. This refers to those who are already involved to some extent within the 5G testbeds and trials program. So if you're already in receipt of funding from previous rounds, we are very, very happy to see you contribute to put in a bid for RCC funding, provided that you make proposals that are clearly new in scope and add value beyond previous project activities. So, you know, great if you've been involved before on the program. We want you to be involved, but we want to see something new, something innovative, something different, building on what you've done before, or something entirely new. And related to that, there are a number of funding rounds, either ongoing or coming up from the 5G testbeds and trials program. Apply to all of them if you think, you know, it makes sense. If you've got proposals that meet all the different sets of eligibility criteria. Bear in mind, though, that if you do put in multiple bids, we'll want to know that they are sufficiently different. We can't double fund, triple fund. And we'll also want to know, actually, if you are applying for multiple projects and multiple funding streams, we'll need to be reassured that you have the capacity and the capability to meet all of the requirements of those projects without duplicating resource. Okay, so the eligibility criteria around the consortia. Next one is around what we want to see in your actual bid. So your project proposal, your bid should include a clearly defined business plan, and that includes the use cases, applications and services that will be involved, and the benefits 5G technologies will bring to them in a rural context. We need to see a fully costed delivery plan, demonstrating how both capital and operating costs are met by a combination of DCMS grant funding and investment from the consortium. And we'll need to see also evidence that I touched upon earlier that costs need to be capitalised or treated as capital expenditure compliant with state aid and meet the definition of experimental development. To help you, there are supporting documents alongside the main documentation that sets out very, very clearly, explicitly what those requirements are. But again, can't repeat this enough, use the mailbox, come to us if you need any more information, any more clarification. Mention security, so we want to see strategic approach will be taken to information management and cyber security within your bid, using industry best practice and standards. And it kind of is one of the key pillars of the program. We want to see evidence that you're testing new commercial and technical solutions for more efficient deployment of advanced network infrastructure, so thinking about spectrum sharing, other spectrum models, differentiated services, and so on. So continuing what we want to see from the project, convincing model, capacity for collaborative delivery by the consortium, we mentioned that. We want to see the added value that our funding will make. You know, what will DCMS capital funding do that you couldn't do without it? We want to, this is an R&D project, so success is measured almost as much by what we find out rather necessarily than what works. So what doesn't work, what works, it's measuring exactly the process. So we want to see how the project will baseline, measure, document, report longitudinally the value added by and the impacts of your project. So this should include your quantifiable metrics, your quantitative measures, indicating how achievement of KPIs will be measured through the benefits delivered by your project, and in thinking in terms of benefits of social, environmental, economic, as well as commercial achievements and sustainability. So we've attached our program level KPIs to the project application guidance to give you a sense of what we're looking to measure from the overall program. What you come up with needs to be relevant to your own particular bid, but we imagine it will be a subset of those. But that is something, if you progress to successful award of contract, we will work with you in refining and finalising those delivery plans. Final bullet here is demonstrate how your project, where relevant, will deliver or accelerate the delivery of what you build or the services you provide beyond the period of our funding. So we're looking for this project to be sustainable. So we don't want projects to run with DCMS funding when that funding expires, everything shuts down. You know, all the social and economic benefits that have been brought to the community, all of the learning, it's just stopped. We want to see plans for sustainability. Moving on, so there's a lot of text here. I shan't go through it massively in detail, but all those eligibility criteria feed through these questions. Okay, so all of that stuff about location, about what your project should be, what your consortium should look like, you will answer that through these questions. So 3 sections, your business plan, delivery plan, and money. 9 questions across those 3 sections. That is what we need to see. That is your application. That will cover, if you answer that perfectly, if you get top marks in every question, you are a brilliant bid. You are what we want to see as a rural connected communities project delivering. I draw your attention right at the bottom there to appendices. So just moving on, be mindful of the appendices. Supporting information, it's all in the documentation, but we need supporting information for a couple of the questions. And it's up to you if you want to provide supporting information for a couple more of the questions, which we will assess. I think it's giving you a bit more scope to attach a PDF of your risk registry, for example, or if you want to attach some maps of the geographic area that you're covering, or if you're thinking, actually, through our use cases, we can address poor connectivity in this area, so include some information on what coverage is currently like. So it's giving you the opportunity with the optional appendices just to provide a bit more information rather than trying to cram it into the template. As I said earlier, we need that finance form from every organisation who's applying, not just the lead organisation. There's a form on the website and also there's guidance on completing that form. Any information beyond the above, if you want, as I said earlier, to include anything else, like links to documents or brochures, include it all in an appendix as links, as hyperlinks. You can use that to explain in more detail your local environment, your history, the context of your bid, anything that forms out of the questions that you think it would be useful for us to know. They won't be considered as part of the assessment process. However, we may read them later on as part of due diligence in later stages of the assessment. So include them at your risk if you want. We're not obliged to read them though, just to be clear. And finally, kind of most importantly, we get a lot of jargonese, we get a lot of buzzwords. We've seen them all, they don't impress us. clearly and concisely articulate what it is you're trying to do. The questions in the application guidance are quite detailed. We want detailed, clear responses throughout. Emphasize what it is you're going to be doing, how you're going to be doing it. You know, there's a word count for a reason. Be precise and accurate. That's what will impress us. Finally, nearly, any questions beyond today, you can submit up to the 27th of September. We will endeavour to answer them as quickly as possible and with as much detail as possible. All our answers will be made public. We won't verbatim publish your question. We'll kind of summarise the nature, the content of your question, provide an answer that others can use. If you think you're asking something that is commercially sensitive, we'll ask you about why it is. And if that's the case, if we agree it is commercially sensitive, we won't publish it. So feel free to ask us detailed questions about the commercial financial aspects of any possible bid. Further information on our friends at UK 5G have a lot of very useful stuff, both around 5G generally, but also previous projects that we funded. And just flagging up again, you can also sign up to the collaboration platform, which could help you connect with other organisations who are interested in forming a consortium. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Brilliant. Thank you. So we've got some, thank you. Oh, yeah, of course. So we've got some time for questions. Just while Andy spots the hands that are going up around the room, as usual, I've got a couple of questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it has been known for successful applicants to sort of put a bid together and put their timeline for the delivery, and then if they're successful, then start thinking about, you know, coming together and that kind of stuff. And that's, is it to convince you guys at the DCMS that the data
has slightly more information in it. So some will have these, you know, they can pull off the back of a shelf that they use every time. Other organisations may not have that. Okay.
I mean, obviously, we do have delivery plans, business cases, but with the word limits being so tight and the level of detail you seem to be requiring, it would just be really useful if we could see what you expect and in what format.
Well, just so on the delivery plan, that is an appendix, right? An appendix, sorry, which is a PDF, 2 sides. So, I mean, if we showed you something maybe that we would expect to see, that could be helpful. Yes. Okay.
So you'll take that back?
Well, we'll take that back.
Okay.
And given the time, the duration of the competition, we'll endeavour to do that quickly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there's a question at the far end there. Thank you for waiting.
Are there any circumstances under which you will claw back the grant?
Yes. So if you fail to meet the conditions set out in the grant funding agreement.
Okay, but simply failure to achieve the objective of what is classified as experimental development isn't one of them.
So,
am I right in thinking there'll be deliverables in the grant funding agreement?
There will be.
And the deliverables will generally be about project activity rather than about the impact of experimental development.
So what you will be delivering will be a project designed around the definition of experimental development. So your delivery plan will be a plan that will achieve benefits that contribute towards experimental development. Therefore, if you miss bits of your delivery plan, you will be missing bits of experimental development work, and that means you will be in breach of the grant funding agreement signed with the department, which would mean repercussions, which could involve clawback, which could involve termination.
I guess my only comment is that in an experimental development, you learn by failing as well as learning by succeeding.
So
and in rural areas, this is an extremely difficult thing to achieve anyway.
So if I can clarify.
Change some of the deliverables in the project, subject that you still try to meet the project's objectives, but just that you change some of the deliverables. Is that a right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, the way you deliver it might have to change.
You know, things do go wrong out of your control. We'd want to see maybe some of this in the risk register that you include within your bid. But, you know, in good faith, if something goes wrong, and it goes wrong, then of course we'd have a conversation about reviewing timelines. But to the best of your knowledge and every good faith within your bid, we want to see this is how we're going to do it. In your risk register, this is what we do if it goes wrong.
Because if we could plan it now perfectly, we wouldn't need to trial it, we'd be deploying.
Exactly. Simulation.
But that wasn't my question.
Oh, right. Okay. What was your question?
We've got about 5 weeks to get this application in, and we're all going to throw a lot of resource to do that. Mm-hmm. Is there any feedback from previous projects as to the cost of bidding? And is there any mechanism for recovering any of that cost for successful bids?
On your first question, I don't think so, but we can find out. On your second question, no. Sorry.
I thought that's what you said.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, on the cost of bidding stuff, the reason for having those workshops back in June was to try and find out both what opportunities there may be, but also what barriers people might have in terms of preventing them from putting in a bid. And what we've tried to do, I think, what Paul and his team and others have tried to do at DCMS is try and make it as flexible and as simple for people, such that cost isn't doesn't dissuade them from getting grant money. Yeah. Are there other questions? There's one right at the back, Andy. Yeah, thanks.
Get my steps in today.
Yeah, I'm Sunday Ikbu from Manchester Met University. So I've got 2 questions. One has to do with the experimental development. So what proportion of the proposal, in terms of percentage, would describe the experimental development as opposed to the commercial and technical solution testing?
Yep.
And the second question has to do with the technology readiness level of the experimental development component. So is there any requirement? If there is, what are they?
So I think that's threaded through the 9 questions. So rather than picking up each one individually. So for example, question 6 is about ensuring a commercially sustainable environment beyond the duration of funding. Question 9 is demonstrating the added value and impact of that funding commercially, economically, socially. There are questions around question 6, say we're looking at what are the actual benefits of any commercial, innovative or technological things you're doing. It's a difficult question to answer because experimental development, commercial benefit, socio-economic benefit, it's threaded throughout all of the questions because these are things that underpin the whole project. So, we are looking fundamentally to build the business case, the evidence case for 5G investment by demonstrating innovation, commercial innovation, technological innovation. We're looking at showing demand and the impact of meeting that demand through new use cases. And that can be by, finding commercial and socio-economic benefits from those use cases. So given that they are kind of the 2 main points of the project, they run throughout all of the questions. There are some specific questions where you can really highlight what experimental stuff you will be doing and what benefits you will bring. There are specific questions where you can highlight commercial impact both within the duration of the project but also beyond the duration of the project. So it's threaded throughout. I suggest, have a good look at the application guidance. If you're not sure what any particular question means, what kind of evidence you should be providing, then drop us a line and we'll endeavour to kind of point you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thanks. Are there any other final questions? There's one towards the front here, Andy.
Hi, Colin Wood again from Dorset Council. I'm sure many of us in the room are in a similar situation. We have no mobile network coverage in many of our areas that we're looking at. Is the onset of 5G strong enough? So to to say that that's why we want to do it here. So you might say you don't need 5G to do that, but the fact that there is no mobile network coverage, is that strong enough to include an area in our bid?
So it's not an objective of this program is improving coverage. We want to see the use cases and the innovative solutions. If those use cases and innovative solutions involve the building of infrastructure that in turn will benefit connectivity, then that's fine. That is something that we will expect to see. It's not a condition of funding, but if it's pertinent and relevant to your bid, then you will be scored on it, and that is something we will be interested in seeing.
Does that help, Colin? Yes. Yeah, great. Thanks. So, any other questions? Going once, twice? Yeah? Great, okay.